Welcome to this episode of Who Gives a Vote, where we discuss all things politics and some other things along the way. All the views expressed in this podcast are personal views and do not reflect the views of any organisation or entity that the participants may be involved with. So let's get started. Well, welcome to this episode of Who Gives a Vote. We've got George. How you going?
Yeah, good. Good to be back in.
You missed last week?
Yeah.
Don't worry, we're repeating the same topic just to make sure. You too, David.
Yes, I'm pleased that there's the opportunity to revisit, as it were.
And Robert, you were here last week.
Yeah, I'm
left.
very, I suppose, blessed to be given a seat. We're missing Carly today.
Yep.
And I feel honoured to be sitting in her seat. I'll do my best not to irritate more than normal.
So
Yeah,
is this the first one that Carly's missed?
This is the first one that Carly has missed. I'm waiting for the doctor's certificate. I'll have to wait and see. But yeah, she's not available today. We have moved it from Thursday to Wednesday, both this week and next week. And then for 3 weeks, we're going to take some time off and then come back in March because I'm going away to New Zealand. And, well, unless you guys want to run the ship. Anyone keen? No, we'll have a break then. So, yeah, this will be one. We did talk about this topic last week, but we're narrowing down the focus to just one part, one component of that. And I think it's important for two reasons. One, David, you have a very strong view and you've done a lot of work in this space, but also it is a really important part of the legislation. So just to put it into perspective, this bill was introduced on the 10th of February. It's been referred to the Justice, Integrity and Community Safety Committee. Submissions closed on the 17th. David, which you put in a submission, is that correct?
Yes, I did, yes.
Yep. Not a lot of time, was there?
Well, there wasn't. I mean, I'd been on Gari, so when I left to go over there in the middle of last week, the bill wasn't even up on the website, on the parliamentary website. And I came back thinking I better have a look at that. And then, I got a note from you saying submissions closed tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So, yeah, it was a scramble.
Yeah, well, you did very well. And if anyone wants to go on to the Who Gives a Vote website and look under their blogs, there's your submission there, which is very informative and helped me with some of my talking points today.
Stuart,
So,
just
thank
on
you.
that, what can I ask you, David, what drove you to put in a submission? Do you normally put in a submission for these sorts of things?
I certainly have. Yeah, I've done submissions on quite a lot of. I think I started when there was a submission on the electoral system after
Right.
the election of the Goss Labor government, and
Oh, wow.
and in fact that was. I've still got a copy if you're interested, and it was talking about electoral systems. In fact, I proposed a novel way of overcoming this problem of large electorates in the regions and so on.
What was the way?
Sorry.
What was
Oh, my proposal was that for electorates that were very, very large,
Yeah.
very, very scattered populations, you had two members, a member and
Yeah,
a
I
deputy
heard about
member,
that, yes.
but with only one of them able to sit at a time. Now,
Yeah.
it was only one vote, but it doubled the number of parliamentary representatives
Yeah.
who could deal
Get
with community
ideas and
aspects.
It was
deal
like a
with it, yeah.
president, vice president
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
thing.
But
So
actually,
for-
in Parliament, only one of them gets to vote at a time.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Or speak. It didn't get up, but I got called in to flesh out that submission. The commissioner was Professor Colin Hughes, who'd been my old lecturer in political science. So, yeah.
And how would you elect the deputy? Would it be the first and second people that get it? Or
I think it's just
Or a
that you'd be
ticket.
voting for a
A ticket,
team.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the end of the episode, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Totally irrelevant. But if you ever need to pad it out,
It gives us some credential. But talking
Yeah,
about that
absolutely.
that community consultation or the public hearing was held today in Townsville. So not
That
a
was
lot.
it?
That was it. It's done. We now move on
why did they choose Townsville for it?
as far away as possible from Brisbane, I suppose.
So there won't be a Brisbane one.
No, that's it. So it actually comes back from committee report on the 27th of February. So let's break that down. The legislation amendments in the bill were written in 4 weeks. The whole consultation process and decision-making process will be completed in 3.
wow.
That's-
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, for something that
yeah.
overturns such a long-standing fundamental principle.
And
Yeah.
that may well be in breach of the Commonwealth Constitution, the implied provisions of the Constitution.
Yeah.
So anyway,
So
there was a box on the, as you may know, there was a box to tick on the submission form which said, were you prepared to, provide or appear at the hearings and provide further information? And of course I ticked it, yes. Clearly not going to be very relevant.
yeah, well, I think from when I looked at the submissions, there was two from the Rifle Association, one from the Townsville Legal Service, and there wasn't any representation from the Legal Aid of Queensland. There was no representation from Amnesty International, who also provided a submission. The Teachers Union of Queensland put in a submission as well, a really good and comprehensive one. There were over 200 submissions that were provided currently. It's interesting that neither your or my submissions are online yet, so you would assume then there's going to be more than 200. They're still probably uploading them as we speak. We'll check that. But I find it very informative that, say, for example, the last bill I looked at, which was open for community consultation for 3 months, had 3 submissions. This one was open for days, and it had over 200 submissions. Some of them were quite informative, like one line telling the government where they should go or where they should stick their weapons laws, but certainly others were very, very informative. And I've got some quotes that we're going to bring out from those which have just.
So it was the free speech and the weapons. It was a comment on them all.
It was free speech, weapons, and the powers, the extended
But
police
that's
powers.
chunky. That's that chunky. How can Mr. and Mrs. Average, e.g. myself, even go figure that out? And then the
You're not
time
average.
frame.
Yeah.
You're far from average,
Thank you, George.
thankfully.
Yeah. You may be ordinary, but you're extraordinary.
Okay.
You're
Thanks,
extraordinary.
guys.
Yeah.
I was just reflecting on David's pedigree, obviously, with his legal and George's legal background and your legal background. I'm almost sort of primary school. I did get my crayon license, but
Yeah, well, I feel your pain because, as I said in our chat, that I felt like I was writing in crayon in front of a calligrapher when I read my submission compared to David's. But luckily, we won't need to compare them because they haven't even made the website yet. But
right, okay.
I do definitely want to show you something, and that is the legislation that we are going to be talking about tonight. So if you look here, this is the actual part of the legislation which will be formed. I think it's section 52, capital D of the Criminal Code, subsection 1, which says recital, distribution, publication or display of prohibited expressions. A person who publicly recites, publicly distributes, publishes or publicly displays a prohibited expression in a way that might reasonably be expected to cause a member of the public to feel menaced, harassed or offended commits an offence unless the person has a reasonable excuse.
That's gone so far beyond anti-Semitism. That's like talking about what Fox News would call cancel culture.
Yeah, well,
offended.
Offended. Yeah, and so, but it goes. So when we look
said,
at
George.
when we look at the rest of it, it's subsection 5, subsection B says it's irrelevant whether or not a member of the public has heard or seen the prohibited expression. So it's irrelevant whether they. So isn't that, David? Is that right? It's about the intent. It's whether their intent.
Well, that's. I suppose that's right. I haven't really gone through that in any detail, but in effect, what they're saying is you don't have to prove that somebody was offended. You only have to prove that they, somebody might have been if they happen to hear it or whatever it is.
Yeah. So the bill does not list slogans on the Act itself. It's regulated, and the regulation is so it doesn't have to go through the same scrutiny as legislation. Regulation allows the minister to make a recommendation for those slogans, and as it stands at the moment, the phrases that they're referring to are currently from the river to the sea and globalise the intifada. Yep. So your submission talked a lot about that. What's your views when you see that legislation, despite the fact that the legislation doesn't refer to slogans, but the government has indicated that those are the two that they're going to have front and centre to make it a criminal offence. with a 2-year imprisonment if you utter those words in public. What is your view when you read that legislation and that's been flagged and that it doesn't even need to pass scrutiny of an act of legislation, but it just has to go through a regulatory procedure to be added?
It's curious, isn't it? Because the way the bill is framed, it refers to prohibited expressions, and a prohibited expression is one that the minister declares to be prohibited. So it's not set out in the Act; it's going to be set out in a regulation.
It just comes on.
And he's obliged to do various things, including consult with the police and consult with the Human Rights Commissioner.
Consult.
Yeah, consult. That's right.
Yeah, so
doesn't
consult
have to pay
is
any attention to them. No,
Yep.
no. They're actually under the old. That's not in the bill. It's set out in the criminal code already in relation to prohibited symbols, and it's just really been adopted there.
Yeah.
So the first step that he has to do is to declare that it's a prohibited expression. One of the curious things is that the criteria for determining whether it's a criminal or whether it ought to be prohibited is different from the criteria which determines whether it's an offence. I can pick that up for you if you want me to, but in relation to considering that question of whether it should be prohibited, he has to take into account it has to be something where the expression must be regularly used to incite discrimination, hostility or violence towards a relevant group. And then the relevant group is defined under the criminal code already, which is a relevant group based on race, religion or sexual attributes.
Yeah.
Doesn't actually say anything about political opinion or political group, So that's the criteria for
So what are those
determining
three
a
again?
relevant
The
group.
race, religion and sexual...
Well, the sexual identification
Yeah.
and that sort of stuff. There's 2 or 3 related, sexual related matters. So that's got to incite discrimination, hostility, or violence. But when you get to the offence itself, what that says is that in a way that might reasonably be expected to cause a member of the public to feel menaced, harassed, or offended.
Yeah.
So there are two elements to this, I suppose. One is that the criteria for declaring something to be a prohibited expression relates to those other ones we talked about, and in relation to a relevant group. But when you get into the offence itself, it's not causing the same things. It's menaced, harassed or offended, and it doesn't have to be a member of the group. It's just a member of the public. In fact, it doesn't even have to be a real member of the public. It can be a theoretical member of the public, because it doesn't matter whether anyone actually sees or hears you. It's pretty extraordinary stuff.
So I'd be stuffed on this podcast because people might not be...
That's
They might
right.
not be listening.
I mean, there are some defences we could use, but we'll come to them later on.
Yeah,
perhaps.
because I do. There's one there, particularly when you refer to it, it's actually the religious element of that defence, which I also want to go to. But before we do that, you talked about this, so my question was, why are these slogans offensive? And in future, could the offences such as go back to where you came from, speak English or go home, we're full, no Sharia law here, or ban the burqa, could they equally match the description if a future, let's say a more left-leaning government got in and they deemed them to be offensive? I mean, I think they sound more offensive to me because I understand them. Is it, George? Do you see a distinction there, or?
Yeah, well, it'd be hard to. I mean, it's all a spectrum, but yeah, I mean, if once you start doing this, and I mean, the slippery slope is just this cliche, but in this case, it really does apply. This really is opening it up. You start with 2. Where will you end, and why do you start with those 2 in particular? When if you thought about it, there'll be lots of very offensive slogans that people can say at rallies, lots of ways that people can threaten the legitimacy of other groups. It is
a slippery slope, George.
Yeah, and I mean, I would never normally say that slippery slope because I think it is trite and No, but in this
Yeah.
case, I think
Yeah.
more than any other situation I've ever seen, where once you start thinking that freedom of speech isn't absolute, or freedom of speech where you can have prohibited statements that can be regulated by the minister, is
I grew up in Queensland, and I witnessed some incredible bigotry, racism, hatred growing up. But my own experience wasn't against Jewish people, although there's no question that is happening and it needs to be addressed. But when I was younger, I witnessed and I saw people being very aggressive and hateful towards Aboriginals.
Yeah.
At times there were Vietnamese, Lebanese in the community that I came from. At the time, they were treated very poorly. So why is it that we've identified two slogans that identify a relationship between two entities, but not acknowledging the fact of the historical oppression that, say, the Aboriginal people have been under, or the racism?
Yeah, it's not the words for me; it's the intent
Yeah.
of the person. Is there hatred behind it? And I just don't understand. We're creating like an 8 kilogram sledgehammer approach to drive an attack.
But there's the most
Yeah.
famous case law in relation to intent, which is intent cannot be proven; it can only be inferred by a proven set of facts. So it's an inference, isn't it? Like your intention. How hard is it to prove intention in this case?
But
They
it's like a coffee cutter pieces of legislation. What worries me is that we go from the river to the sea. What about the creek to the ocean? What about the river meets the sea? All the inferences of that phrase. Next thing, I was offended by this. So that's that slippery slope. Like, once we start cutting out, that's why I'm saying, is your intent malice or not?
Yeah, well, let's have a
That's
look.
not really relevant to the offence. As this is drafted, that's right. It doesn't matter what you intended.
That's correct.
It's just a question of whether
you say that?
what you say is a prohibited expression.
Correct,
and
David.
it might reasonably be expected to cause someone to feel menaced, harassed, or offended. So it doesn't matter what you intend.
So intention is not an issue in this part, is
Intention's
it?
not an
Correct.
issue. That's
Which
right.
is-
Which is why I raised it.
Yeah, it used to be, didn't it? So,
Used to be well.
in the federal legislation, intent was deliberately removed out. So it used to be
I see,
that,
yes,
that you cause intent to harm or cause intent to cause fear. Now it's not relevant to this offence, is it?
No, not at all.
Which to me is very alarming. I want to take you to
Correct.
one of the topical examples of the use of the Globalise intifada, which was Grace Tame. Is it Grace Tame, who was Australian of the Year? She got up and she spoke. I'm going to play a portion. It's a bigger portion that's been played in the media because they refer to one part, but the whole speech goes for, I think it's about 3 minutes. And it starts, it's not the type of language I would use. Like I wouldn't, I'm not saying, I don't believe that the federal government of Australia is oppressing its people or looking, is only taking monies from donors. And that was sort of the theme that she was talking about. But her legitimacy over the fact that she believes that there's been war crimes committed by a government against another group of people, include women and children, is a legitimate complaint. And by the numbers of people representing that view in Australia, obviously not just one or two, it's not a fringe belief. There's a lot of people who think that what's happening in Gaza is not right. They also believe that what happened to the Israeli people on October 7th was also reprehensible. But the response from the Israeli government hasn't been appropriate. Now, that's their view. And as you say, the right to express that political view is one of the cornerstones of the freedoms that Australia has to offer. But let me play this and then we'll talk about it. So this comes in from with the last few minutes or last probably minute of her talking to the protest or to the people at the protest.
You cannot buy our compassion and you cannot buy our love. That is what we have. Those are our weapons, our collective communal weapons, and we will keep fighting with those until the very end. But I needn't remind you here of any of this. We don't need convincing. I'm preaching to the choir. There are still so many people, good people, who are scared to speak and scared to act. So what I want you to do after you leave here today is look around you, amongst your colleagues, amongst your friends and your family, and find as many people as you can who have not come to a protest and bring them along next time, because we need them. We need everybody. We have to continue to mobilise and we have to continue to globalise. Say it with me, from Gadigal to Gaza. Globalise the intifada. One more time. From Gadigal to Gaza. Globalise the intifada. Thank you.
What's your thoughts when you see that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know why that specific phrase, the globalised intifada. I don't know the precise meaning of it, but it's part of Australian history, part of Australian culture, that you can be on what she is on a soapbox and say what is in your heart. Like that. You can't jail her for a year for saying that. That would be, or 2 years, like that, for her to be jailed for saying that.
So to be clear, right now they want to strip her from her Australian.
Yeah.
No one's ever been stripped from their Australian citizenship, Australian honours, Australia Day honours. Can you talk about the globalised, the intifada concept? But I guess before you do that, I do want to bring up if you look at the beginning of the part, the reason why I want to bring that first part out is, what was she talking about weaponising? Compassion and love. That's what she was talking about. She said compassion and love are our weapons. She wasn't. So when she then goes on and says globalised intifada, you can infer what she means by that by going back to what she said before, that we must act with compassion and love. She's not saying we must go out and fight and pick up arms. We must fight the oppressor. She's saying we will love. We will
get more people to a protest.
Yeah. So, yeah, that to me is a significant part of that speech, and it's part that's not being covered in the media.
Yeah, that's true. When you, and I'd only seen that bit that was in the media, I hadn't seen the full extent of it. When you see that, that's what she's talking about, is developing a mass movement, expanding the mass movement against the Israel conduct in Gaza, and generally, I imagine, against the treatment of the Palestinians over 80-odd years. Globalise the Intifada has been interpreted by many people as simply developing a world movement against the actions of Israel and in favour of human rights and justice for Palestinians.
So intifada means struggle, yep?
Intifada means, roughly struggle as I understand it.
It's shaking on. I'm just looking
Globalise
shaking off or something, yeah.
Globalise the struggle or shaking off the burden.
of rebellions and popular.
See, if I didn't, because I don't, like my focus is so localized. I would have thought it meant something like jihad. Like if you said globalize the jihad, would be much more offensive.
Now, if you spoke to a person of Jewish, they would align those things as the same.
Jihad as intifada, yeah.
But from a if you talk to Palestinian people, if you read the submissions that have been placed, 200 submissions, and maybe 6 of them are from the Muslim community, what they say is that they want to globalise the knowledge of the fact that their place, where their families have lived for much longer, is being reduced. Their freedoms are being reduced. They are non-citizens on their own land. That's what they're referring to. Now, are there elements of evil within that space? Of course there are. But does that then mean that in Australia you can't advocate for people not to be murdered in Gaza?
Yeah, and people would take Christian statements and use them for very evil means as well. Like if it is a statement that originates in, as you say, globalizing awareness, and some people are using it for an evil sort of reference. You can't.
Well, look. Just quickly here, it is non-violent resistance and violent actions. So it has a history of both, as we know. and she was advocating, as you said, to love and compassion.
So, well, what she said was, effectively, from the Aboriginal lands of Sydney to Gaza, we need to basically uprise and stand up against this atrocity. I personally wouldn't go around using those words because I understand that it does cause fear within certain communities. But I equally detest legislation that forces me to speak in a certain way. And it's interesting, the other thing she said is that people are scared to speak. They are scared to act. Do you think now people will be more scared to speak and more scared to act if they're facing 2 years in prison?
Yeah, I think they'll be angry. Some will be angrier and more resistance.
It's a problem in that sense, isn't it? I mean, listening to that speech, it's pretty clear that when she's talking about globalising intifada, she's talking about increasing the opposition in terms of peaceful protest. I mean, it's what she's asking people to do is come to demonstrations and involve themselves in the protest. There's no mention of armed struggle at all, or anything that could be remotely construed as armed struggle. She's not saying let's develop a militia. She's saying let's increase the number of people who come to demonstrations and who who involve themselves in the struggle of ideas, I suppose.
So let's be clear about why because it wasn't just her there. There were many, many people who came to a protest against Herzog who came to Australia, and what she has said when she spoke in that to the people, she said, we have a leader of a country who signed a bomb that then got dropped on Gazan women and children and residents, free people. And that's the contrast she's drawing. She said, we're talking about a person who said there are no good people in Gaza. So she's compared that to compassion and love. And then in that whole speech, she's used one term which I wouldn't use, but I wouldn't legislate for her not to use, because as you understand, in protests you have to be confronting, you have to get people to notice, because if you just sat in a park and ate sandwiches, who's going to notice, Dave?
Yeah, it's not a protest.
That's true, and it's not like you're giving a paper at a symposium, when you might be teasing out all those nuances. You're there to stir the audience, and you're there to gain publicity for your cause. I don't know how many of you guys have been involved in these sorts of rallies. I've done a couple, not for a long time, but in effect, that's the whole point of the rhetoric is to get your point across in a very punchy sort of way. Mm-hmm. I suspect she may not be convicted under this legislation, given the context of that speech, but that's not the point. The point is really the worry that simply picking on a particular expression, which can have multiple meanings, can put you at risk of being prosecuted.
I have no doubt that if that happened in Queensland after this legislation, without question she would have been charged. Whether she would have served a term of imprisonment is secondary, but there is no question that you would be charged for that, because it would be spitting in the face of the state saying you must not say that, and then she would say it. If she said that in Queensland at a rally, it would have gone back to the days of Joe, where the protest organiser would have been arrested and we would have seen chaos. And that didn't work, because after that, the police understood, hey, if we talk to protesters and we have good dialogue and we are on the same page, the outcomes are significantly better. This is oppressive. This is bad.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right that she'd be prosecuted. I'm not quite sure whether she'd be convicted. That'd be another question. You could be pretty confident there'd be a significant fundraising campaign, for a defence.
Absolutely.
But that's not how we want to resolve these sorts of things. We don't want people having this, and we don't want a defendant having to spend time and money to defend themselves for putting a point of view, but we also don't want the state, the police force, the courts being tied up with these sorts of things. It's a hugely expensive exercise.
Yeah, and we can't keep crushing the human spirit when there are wrongdoings. You've got to allow it to vent. Otherwise you just build up a pressure cooker and push people underground, and they don't say it, but their actions don't reflect a positive culture. In the early 70s, I marched up George Street 3 times. I had no intention of any violence at all.
Was that after the pubs closed or before?
No, that was we had a couple of sherbets at the Cecil, but then we walked up into the St George Square. One was for Aboriginal land rights. One was for equal rights for gays, and I think the third one was to stop whaling. That should be allowed. I felt good about it. There was police coming up and talking to me and taking down my name and all that sort of thing. And that was the Joe era.
Yeah, they took your name, all right. Yeah,
yeah, they got. But what I'm saying is, we should be allowing people that. I keep coming back to that intent. Her intent was to foster encouragement to that there's hope.
Not if you read Sky News.
It wasn't incite. It wasn't to incite.
Yeah.
Horrific violence. It was to try and resolve something that's just been going on for so long.
I want to move to the reasonable excuse if the conduct was for a genuine purpose. This is where we were talking about.
Well, that's
before.
where I was leading to, Stuart. It was a genuine purpose.
So it gives examples. It says if it was for artistic, religious, educational, historical, legal, law enforcement, or it was in the public interest, such as the publication is a fair and accurate report, and a genuine political dispute carried on public interest. So here you've got a range of different things, which to me creates a bit more uncertainty than it creates certainty. Because if you talk about, some people would say that Globalise intifada has a religious component to it. Is that fair to say, David?
I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah.
The definition that I looked at before, it does.
Yeah, because there is a religiosity to the Muslim people, and they have a belief. So there is some. So if a Muslim cleric got up and said those words, would they be covered because it's conduct for a genuine purpose under their religion? Could they argue the point?
Well, I suppose I'm not sure that I'd be, mounting that as my first line of defence.
But then why put it in there? Which is it only for certain religions? Is it only for white religions? Is what I'm saying.
Well, that's possible.
Yeah.
That you don't want people going to jail for quoting from the Old Testament or whatever. That's
and couldn't, if this got up, couldn't then you go to the Anti-Discrimination Act, and I'm not a legal, and fight a case against this?
No.
No, you couldn't.
It couldn't. It wouldn't work.
No, it's legislated.
Oh, okay.
And
thank you for that.
They do what so when a bill is passed, they take it through a test, and they
for the general public, it wouldn't end up a pea soup.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure at the very start of it says about it.
This is about
it breaches the human rights bill, but it doesn't.
But they do a compatibility test, and they actually provide a document, and at the end they say, despite the fact that your human rights are violated, despite the fact that it's against the Charter, despite all these things, we still think it meets the definition of effective legislation.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, so then once they've done that, you can't then come back and say...
Other pieces come into play.
It does. You can argue that conduct in the process of you being charged, but you can't argue that the legislation. So if a police officer was to do something that was a breach of your human rights and didn't align with legislation, then you could make that argument. But you can't make the argument. Is that right?
Yeah, that's sums it up.
So even though it's technically discriminatory, racially discriminatory, religiously discriminatory,
yeah,
because it's inciting.
No, because it's been it's passed the compatibility test in the legislation.
Wow.
Yeah, it's legal
Heaven
because
help
we
us.
say it's legal under law.
The one act doesn't bind them from another act.
Uh-huh.
But I mean,
Okay,
the
thank
last
you.
one, a genuine political dispute carried on in the public interest. I mean, Palestine and Israel is definitely a genuine political dispute. So they'll get to whether it's in the public interest. It'd be hard to say it's not.
Particularly if you've got your population there who's the one who are...
Yeah, it's obviously there's a sizable, we don't know if it's a majority or not, or there's obviously a sizable proportion of Australians who are very engaged on the issue as a political issue. You see it in the number of people protests. So how can you really not say it's a genuine political dispute or in public interest that it
And I think Australians
discuss?
want to see that thing resolved. It's a long-term, very hurtful issue over there, but it's so complex. I think the world would like to see, but it's not the only place in the world. That was what again, running through the pub test. We've got a couple of these things which are Middle Eastern background. What happens if we've got something popping up from some other conflicts where you then say, well, hang on, that's upsetting the Russians or the Ukrainians or Somalians, or where does it end? Right now we're focusing on that.
Stuart touched on that point earlier on, and maybe we'll come back to that later on about the question of why are we just looking at phrases that are offensive to some Jewish people. I mean, I think the short answer to that is they're the ones with the lobby. They're the ones with the political clout.
You can't say lobby, you offended the...
I did, yes. I offended someone by referring to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry as lobby.
Oh, lobby. I thought you were talking about a lobster, David.
No.
Sorry, my bad.
But, I mean, my take on this, just getting back to the point you're talking about with the reasonable excuses, my take on this is that it's designed, first of all, to exculpate a discussion such as this, that, we can't really have this discussion without repeating the expressions. You couldn't give a lecture on the criminal law without repeating the expressions. You couldn't even prosecute someone in court without repeating the expressions. So a lot of those, I think, are designed just to keep that clear. And for people wanting to use it in a religious sense, in an artistic sense, and so on. I think then the defences are reasonably well drafted, certainly better drafted than the Commonwealth version, where the bit of their legislation that they pulled. Some of those things, like a public, discussion in the public interest, were limited to professional journalists. So you and I, who aren't getting paid, wouldn't have the same protections as someone who's on the payroll of the press. My take on this is that what they're really trying to do is to criminalise slogans that are shouted or put on posters and banners at demonstrations. I suspect that's the real target of this, so that you can have a political discussion. If it's a genuine political discussion, you can have that, and you're going to be you'll have a reasonable excuse. But you can't walk down the street with a placard. I mean, obviously, when you're at a demonstration, you can't put 1,000 words on a placard. You put 3 or 4.
A symbol.
Or a symbol or whatever. And that's, I think, what the focus of this legislation's on.
So when we go to from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Doesn't that align with the federal government's two-state solution that says that there will be a free Palestine and a free Israel in that region?
Well, I suppose it does, and there are plenty of scholars. I mean, I had a quick look at Ilan Pape's book today, 10 Myths About Israel, and he makes the point that for Palestinians it always was from the river to the sea. That's historically been their country.
Since up until 1948.
Up until 1948, and they'd like it back, please. I don't see that is of itself capable of an interpretation that ought to be criminalised. The pro-Israel lobby don't like the expression because they suggest that it's arguing for the disestablishment of Israel, and their view. I mean, Josh Frydenberg has been quite open about this. He says arguing for the disestablishment of Israel ought to be criminalised as well. You know, that's an extraordinary step further than this, but that's the, I suppose, the genesis of these kinds of
That's
what do you think about the
slippery
history of it? I mean,
Yes.
like Jews for thousands of years have been particularly harassed, particularly persecuted. Is that make it a special case? Why we should, as you were saying, Frydenberg saying that to argue in any way that could be about the elimination of their country speaks to the Holocaust, speaks to earlier, I don't know if pogrom's the right word, but the very history of Jewish people is maybe a special case, that why we shouldn't allow speech that talks about something that could say, well, from there to there, it couldn't exist. Isn't that
No,
what?
look, I don't think their argument is as sound as that. I think their argument simply is that they believe really strongly that Israel should exist as a safe haven for Jews, and they don't want to hear any discussion about it. They want that to be a given, and any, I mean, Frydenberg's case, and I stress this goes well beyond where this bill goes, but Frydenberg's position essentially is it ought to be prohibited to argue against the continued existence of Israel as a state.
Yeah.
Curiously, it wasn't a criminal offence to argue for the establishment of Israel, and one of the points I make in this, and I've made in other submissions, is that if it's not a criminal offence to argue for the establishment of a country, should it be a criminal offence to argue for the disestablishment of it? In other words, it's not a criminal offence to say we ought to embark on a colonial project. It is a criminal offence to say we ought to resist or overturn a colonial project.
Yet I could completely disagree with the concept that you could disestablish Israel, and I believe that Israel should, it is there, and that's a place for people to live freely. But equally, I have a view that Palestine people should also live free and in the region of their forefathers.
The point, I guess, is not. I mean, that's one part of the issue. Would it be good policy to disestablish Israel? That's one question. But the question we're talking about is,
can you have a discussion?
Should it be a criminal offence to discuss that?
Absolutely not.
To advocate.
And like I said, I would never go out and use those words if I believed that it was going to offend somebody. I'd be very mindful of that. But I'm also not going to make it a criminal offence. I don't want to create more legislation that puts our people, our Queenslanders, in jail. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense. I want to take you to one of the submissions, some quotes from people who have placed submissions. As I said, there was over 200 submissions in very few days. So let's have a look at the first one is Legal Aid Queensland. It is concerning in Legal Aid Queensland's respectful view that any expression can incur criminal sanction, including imprisonment, by mere designation and regulation, and without any built-in mechanism for significant oversight or review. The LAQ remains concerned that this process is not subject to any public scrutiny, oversight or review in a unicameral parliament. So effectively, unicameral is the fact that we don't have a Senate in Queensland. There's one vote and it's done. This can be handed through the minister and through cabinet, so it doesn't even go through that. What's your thoughts on the fact, George, that this regulation or this is done with so little oversight?
So is a regulation, can it be disallowed if a member of Parliament asks for it to come to Parliament? Isn't that how it works?
Yes, I think.
Yeah. But you have to get majority vote.
Yeah,
Yes,
then it
that's
has
right.
to come to a vote.
Yeah.
But it's not like the minister can do 100 statements and the MPs have no recourse.
Yeah, but so
it's still a majority thing, though.
Let's put
Yeah.
let's put that in context. The minister who's making the decision is the government of the day, which by its definition has the vote. So for
Sometimes Goss didn't always. Borbridge didn't always. Yeah.
but it's
Right now they do.
Yeah. So it's the norm is that you'd have the votes,
Yeah.
and in that case, it'd be very hard for something to be brought and undone in that way, I would suspect.
Yeah, and my recollection of the process is it lies on the table for 14 days. It's still a regulation. It takes effect from the day it's promulgated, but there's a 14-day period in which a parliamentarian can, lodge whatever the procedure is, to have it disallowed, to move to have it disallowed. Now, sure, an opposition politician might do that, but as you say, the majority are going to presumably support their Attorney General.
And from a very humble perspective, passing the pub test on this one, it just doesn't make any sense to me. We've got a criminal code, we've got a whole lot of other rafts of legislation. Seriously, we're hitting it with an attack with an 8-kilogram sledgehammer from my perspective, and that slippery slope. I don't know what's driving it. Is there a fear that we've had a breakout of some talks about one conflict, a couple of religious groups? Let's crush the whole thing, so we can't talk about anything else because it will spread.
Yeah, and it's very hard to correspond it with the LNP's federal position on hate speech. Like, how do the two go together? This legislation at a state level, and the federal position, which is in favour of free speech to a great degree.
Yeah, it would say that the speech part of the bill was removed in order to get it through. So it is strange that the Conservative group asked for those words to be removed at a federal level, but this is much harder in the
so we don't know what's driving it, Sil. Is it fear that if we don't crush it now, it will it'll just grow like Topsy and
the question,
we'll
I guess,
end up in chaos? Is that what's driving it?
Well, I guess I'd propose a different question. Is this about eliminating hate speech or controlling political rhetoric or speech?
Yeah.
Because...
Well, that's the inference I'm making.
Yeah. There's another quote here by the Queensland Teachers Union, which I thought was interesting, that they were able to, and I didn't see one from the Queensland Law Society, but I did see one from the Queensland Teachers Union. They said the broad, undefined nature of expressions creates the possibility that legitimate political slogans, protest chants, historical references, or union messaging could be prohibited by regulation without parliamentary debate. That's what you were talking about, David. That's some of the things you were concerned about.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. But that is the problem. There's really not going to be much oversight, and effectively you're going to be stuck with what the minister thinks. And going back to those other points that were being made, I mean, are expressions like Pauline Hanson is commonly using in relation to the Muslim community, are they going to be banned? I suspect not, because I think the impetus for this has come from the rise in anti-Semitism, and in particular, of course, the horrific attack at Bondi. So I think that's where the impetus has come from, and to put it at its highest for the proponents of this legislation, I'm assuming that what they're trying to do with this is to stop the rise in anti-Semitism. I mean, I have real doubts about whether there's any connection at all, or any significant connection between demonstrations and placards and slogans and the events of Bondi. I don't think anyone's, that's going to be, I would have thought, impossible to prove. It's just assumed that there's a link, that if you let people get too grumpy,
that's what I was saying,
it's going to cause an increase in anti-Semitism. I mean, one of the points I made,
condition people.
One of the points I made in my submission was that the ministerial criteria has to be that it's regularly used to incite discrimination, hostility or violence. And I gave a few examples of things that might create hostility or violence. I said, following Bondi, all sorts of allegations were made. Politicians and others blamed Islamic extremism and Muslim preachers. That was inciting hostility. Frydenberg blamed the Prime Minister personally and very publicly, and that was inciting hostility. Frydenberg was extraordinarily hostile. The opposition and many Jewish spokespersons blamed the government, and that was hostile. So I think the attempt is to try to eliminate hostility in one direction.
That's the way I see it. But it's I'm getting a feeling from our chat that it's massive overkill.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that Chris
it'll run
Foley's
rampant.
done this because
Yeah.
Chris Foley's been so active in making sure he's not like Campbell Newman. And this is really similar to like the bikie legislation, where if 3 of them gathered in a pizza place, they could get arrested. Where they had pink overalls for them in prison. Like it does feel like they've really gone ahead with themselves on this one. That
It's out of step with
Yeah.
the rhetoric that they've been talking about for a very long time.
Yeah.
And if you talk about conservatives always talking about freedoms, this is a big step towards, well, having said that, Joe Bjelke-Petersen never liked anyone talking out of school. You either had the state view or no view at all. So it's probably maybe going back to a Joe era.
And what about you would see some of this stuff on social media. How would anyone attack that, address that? Like where?
Well, it's Queensland, isn't it? It's not.
Does it?
Yeah, it's
Because you could be I could be reading something that's totally against this legislation in an overseas country.
This is trying to address public demonstrations.
It's a public demonstration.
This is what it's for.
Okay. But still, it's where does it stop? And then you're going to ask police to try and interpret it.
George, do you think banning slogans like this will actually stop or prevent violence?
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't see a relationship between banning a slogan like this and being an effective way to. I mean, I think it'll be a misuse of police resources. Yeah.
I guess the other question I have for you, Robert, is that based on this legislation, it becomes law, it becomes an offence. You've protested before down King George Square, and would this make you rethink your decision to participate in protest if you thought that there could be arrests for that kind of thing?
It puts me underground. Yeah, I'd say, well, maybe I'll stay in the pub and have a beer and just talk to my mates. 'Cause hopefully, we're not getting recorded. But if I go out onto the street, I could wreck my career, my life, my family, just for saying venting. People should be allowed to vent.
So then, David, how does that impact people's right and freedom of expression and democracy?
Yeah, I think it's a major impact on that. I mean, the movements, I'm sure, will get around this one way or another by changing the slogans a bit and so on. One of the ideas I had was that maybe your slogan should be equal rights for Palestine, and let someone try to prove that there's a problem with equal rights. Yes, that's right. But
good one, Dave. I like that.
But it does raise some questions, doesn't it? Because the legislation goes on to talk about a similar expression.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't simply convert, for instance, from the river to the sea, from something like from the Jordan to the Med, because there's the risk that that'll be interpreted in the same way. Even though the opposition to these phrases comes from the notion that the particular phrase has developed its own aura, and if you change the phrase, I think it's hard to argue that in fact that offensive aura runs with words like from the river to the sea are obviously of themselves entirely benign. It's only that they have developed a connotation that is deemed offensive by other people. Now, if you change your language to talk about from the Jordan to the Med, does it really still have the same connotation?
Yeah.
Well, under this legislation, I would call it the castle clause. It still meets the Marbo, the vibe, the gist of it all.
And what about globalise the struggle?
Yeah.
I mean, they take offence at the word intifada because there were a couple of armed uprisings which were referred to as intifadas. But if you said globalise the struggle or globalise the campaign,
Yeah, that's why because I associate it with Lebanon, the Intifada. Yeah, but I guess I hate to use the phrase "slippery slope" again, but you were sort of getting to it, that it is introducing sort of an element into public life and just life generally that we see in the U.S., where people are afraid to criticize Trump, where people are afraid to really step out and. Like you see it right across the Republican Party, but also just across the U.S. generally. When you start, making statement illegal,
And then
it
what
is just a
about-
horrible thing to bring into Australia.
Absolutely. And what about? We talked last week about the movie Demolition Man, where
You're bringing that up again.
Yeah, I love that
What do you-
movie.
Is that Sylvester Stallone?
Yeah, and Wesley Snipes, and they had recorders in the street. So if you swore, it'd be heard, processed, and automatically get fined. So, like, we're going to have to confine this. Like, if we have this conversation, could someone be rapping on the door now and saying you guys have committed an offence?
They'd have to find us first. But I'm glad you actually clarified that, because you brought that up, Demolition Man, 3 times last week. I've actually never seen the movie.
Isn't there like
know.
a good joke about Arnold Schwarzenegger in it? Or is that something else? Where like they call something like the Arnold Schwarzenegger
I think
presidential library, and Sylvester Stallone has some sort of reaction to that. Yeah,
It's a great movie, but
Yeah.
it was challenging the direction we're taking.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
things I was just going to say, one of the things that concerns me about this is the notion that they have that it reasonably offends somebody, and I used in my submission a real experience that I had where I wrote a letter to the Executive Council of Australian Jury, and in the course of that letter, I got a response from Peter Wertheim, the co-CEO, and he picked me up for 2 things. He said I was mostly reasonable, and then he suggested, because I'd referred to the ECAJ as a Jewish lobby, that was offensive and anti-Semitic, and he argued that that I wouldn't use those expressions about another.
the Greeks or
The Irish or whatever, which was silly. I mean, I wasn't talking about the Greeks or the Irish, and everybody calls them a lobby. I didn't intend anything pejorative by it. I was just thinking of a lobby in the same sense of an organisation that campaigns for its members. He thought that was anti-Semitic. The other thing I did was I suggested that,
It's so
that
sensitive.
maybe they
So
could take
sensitive.
organisations like his could take the heat out of the rise in anti-Semitism by publicly expressing some empathy for the plight of the Gazans and the Palestinians. He said that was outrageously anti-Semitic. Now clearly something as benign as that, he was offended.
Yeah, but because he believed, he took it that you were saying that it was the actions of the Jewish people that caused that terrorism response. That's not what you said, and it's not what you meant.
It was nothing like what I said.
But that's why he took offence to it. And
But that's because that's what he's sensitive to,
Yeah.
But suddenly,
hypersensitive.
now,
Yeah.
I know that the legislation says it would reasonably cause, but gee whiz, you don't really want to be going to court to argue about whether if you offend a pro-Israel activist, that's,
If they-
reasonably offending or not.
If they tighten this up anymore, David, you're in the clink, mate. You are you got no chance. They're coming after you for sure.
And they won't take offence.
Yeah.
They'll take a gate to you.
now that you've put a submission in, they've got your details
They
and
have,
they're tracking you.
Knock.
Let's go to Amnesty International's a quote from their response. Measures targeting specific slogans deeply embedded in peaceful pro-Palestinian justice, anti-genocide, anti-apartheid and anti-occupation movements are neither reasonable nor proportionate. Such measures would unjustifiably burden political communication and undermine the fundamental right to freedom of political communication. David, are they unjustifiable, these laws?
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to get involved in political activity, you're going to have to develop your campaign with some degree of
Some sensitivity.
yeah, well, you're going to have to do that, but you really need to run your campaign in a forceful sort of way, and that's happening on both sides. I mean, what could be more forceful than Frydenberg saying that the Prime Minister's personally responsible for Bondi? Now, in a sense, if we're going to preserve our political freedoms, we've got to expect that there'll be, some bruises and some cuts and scrapes on all sides. The alternative is that we say, oh, look, the slightest comment that might offend someone that you're trying to persuade to the contrary should be prohibited. It's a huge price to pay to address an issue that it's not really going to address anyway.
Yeah, and that's it just seems so ineffective to what the cost of what this legislation does for any benefit just seems way out of proportion.
Yeah.
Last words.
Not about Demolition Man.
No. I'm saying it fails the pub test, and the legal eagles here have squared that away. I don't think we need it. I just really don't think. I think there's enough legislation, there's enough community response to work through this without thumping it with an 8-kilogram sledgehammer, because watch the slippery slope. Thank you.
Back. So, George, any thoughts?
I'm going to watch Demolition Man before next episode, but I think anti-Semitism is something that all governments need to always be aware of and act on, and at the same time, freedom of speech is a foundational, fundamental, significant aspect of any free society, and you just can't wipe that away like this. We have limits on free speech, of course. You can't sit in a crowded theater and yell out "fire, fire." There are reasons why speech is curtailed and why you do legislate things about racial hatred, about inciting violence. But to just be able to target political slogans, and for it to be so, to do it through regulation just seems extraordinary, and it's surprising that this is happening.
David.
Yes, it's a very worrying development, because it's so poorly thought out, and if there was any doubt about that, the idea that you can have a week to make submissions and then within a week they'll hold their public hearings and then make a decision or make a recommendation is quite extraordinary. My program really is to start lobbying some politicians. I'd be interested to know what David Lee thinks.
Let's ask him.
He's a lawyer. Let's ask him. Perhaps we should, the four of us could make an appointment to see him and we could explain our position.
Not if we're going to be talking about Demolition Man.
Okay, we'll leave that out.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So, sorry, I interrupted your thought.
No, that's about it.
Yep. So my thoughts are, firstly, you're right. It's very disheartening that Demolition Man has been quoted more times in the last 2 episodes than George Orwell's 1984. I don't know if you've read 1984. I've read it a couple of times.
Yeah.
The first one, I thought it was actually a crap book, and the second time I read it, it just confirmed my thoughts. I just it just was.
It had the listening devices in the wall.
Yeah.
Demolition Man had them in the street, mate.
Yeah, but it's certainly an Orwellian moment. This for me, this is very much
absolutely.
Yeah,
you hit it.
And
yeah, and the way it strikes me is just like I said before, how this just is so out of whack for what you think of as traditional liberal philosophy. How what I think about Orwell is they're having a war with Eurasia, and then just the next week they say, no, we've always been at war with this other massive country. Oceania. And that was his job to just reduce and just change. And Trump does it, of course, all the time. He can say one thing, and that's what I just find so extraordinary. It just feels like it's so counter to what their values have always been, the fundamental values of the Liberal Party.
And I think people govern themselves in the end. And communication to me is like a pressure cooker. It's got to have a vent. And I remember growing up as an very old saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And I think people can come out and say all these things and go, okay, you've said your thing, let's move on. Why should it be construed that that's some sort of criminal offence to vent?
There is a quote I want to leave you with before. Or did you have a?
Oh, I was going to say, I don't think you should ignore in this whole analysis the fact that the pro-Israel lobby, people like the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, etc., have a major and very well organised and very well funded campaign to protect Israel. If you read people like John Lyons in his book Balcony Over Jerusalem and so on, I think this is just part of that same thing.
That's the driver.
Try to deflect any criticism of Israel as far as you can, and by whatever means you can.
So it's not fear; it's power. It's a control measure.
The views of David Lewis are not reflected by any other member.
Just in case you get into trouble.
Yeah.
Well, look, I can't.
But I'm
be
trying to
doxed
figure
anymore.
the
That's
driver.
right.
Is it power or money?
Yeah.
To me, it's
I don't think it's money.
Well, we are out of time. I want to leave with my thought on it, and it's an unknown. It's a quote attributed to an unknown person. It says, "Never let anyone take away your freedom because of the greater good. Freedom is the greater good." Thank you guys for joining us on Who Gives a Vote.
Thank you, Stuart, George, David. Been a wonderful afternoon.